All right.
Hello, and welcome to the PTA Equity Project Town Hall. We are excited to have you. My name is Molly Rao, and I am the Nichols PTA PEP rep. I will be one of your hosts and moderators for this evening, along with Jen Zare, the Lincolnwood PTA PEP rep. I would now like to introduce everyone to Natalia, the Dawes PTA PEP rep. She will explain how to navigate to the Spanish translation that we have available tonight.
Para escuchar esta reunión en español, por favor, busque en sus canales de reunión y oprime donde dice Spanish.
Our format for the town hall is a 30 to 45-minute presentation where presenters will review the historical background information around PEP. They will lay out the mission and vision for PEP, the formula that will ensure greater equity for all District 65 school PTAs, and they will wrap up with the slide presentation with next steps and how you can vote yes for PEP. Finally, there will be a 45-minute Q&A session with a member panel to answer any and all questions you may have. The format for the town hall and ground rules are: the chat has been disabled. Attendees are muted. Please type any questions into the Q&A, and you may also click the box to announce anonymously. Attendees will only see answered questions. As we are able, we will type the answer to some questions in the Q&A box. Other questions we will answer live with the panel. The webinar is being recorded. By virtue of your attendance, you are consenting to being recorded. Q&A is being administered by myself and Jen Zare. The panel will begin answering questions live after the 45-minute presentation. There is Spanish translation. Biz, Kelly, Carla, and Elizabeth, please introduce yourselves and tell us why you became involved with PEP. We will start with Biz.
Hi, everybody. My name is Biz Lindsay Ryan, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm one of the people who started PEP, and my kids are at Dawes and Chute. And part of the reason I was interested in exploring the inequities at schools as an equity, diversity, and inclusion consultant, I found that some schools could hire me to do 4 or 5 sessions, and some could not afford to do any. And some schools were even paying for with their PTA resources for the staff to get professional development. And so this became an example to me of the inequities that existed, and I was wondering and wanted to explore what other inequities might exist. I'm happy to have partnered with SUNY and to bring folks together to determine the scope of the problem. Thanks.
Hi there. My name is Kelly Baldrate. I am the Lincoln PEP rep. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I have 2 kids in District 65. When I first dipped a toe into PTA involvement, I remember being surprised at how very much PTAs did. I think before I had school-age kids, I just thought that districts did a lot more than they do. So that was sort of the early days. And then when Lincoln's Equity Committee essentially recruited me to start attending PEP meetings about 3 years ago, that initial surprise was compounded when I learned how great the disparities were among the PTAs in this one district. So I think that understanding is what cemented my investment in the idea that we as a district could do better, or at least that I wanted to be part of trying to make that happen, which is why I find myself here this evening.
Hi, my name is Carla Thomas, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. I am a parent in D65, and I've been working on anti-racism and equity initiatives at Dewey for about 3 years now, and I've been involved with PEP since 2019. I joined the PEP committee because it was a way to create actual policy change that would have a lasting impact in our schools. And I think that the PEP committee asked me to join because they heard I had a few opinions on a few things, just a few.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Davies, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. I have 3 children, 2 in District 65 at Willard and Haven, and I have one that's a freshman at ETHS this year. I joined PEP in 2017 because I wanted to understand the real inequities that occur from school to school due to the differences in PTA resources, and it was incredibly eye-opening. I also very sincerely wanted to be involved in an organization that could affect real change for all of our children in District 65. I'm also a member of the PEP leadership team, along with Suni Kartha, Biz Lindsay Ryan, and Liz Rolowitz. And I just wanted to say that it's been very humbling and inspiring to work within a volunteer committee who's not only committed to ensuring equitable access for children in their own schools, but also in ensuring that equitable access occurs for all kids in all schools in District 65. I also just wanted to say a quick thank you again for taking your time out and being here this evening and wanting to learn more about the PTA Equity Project One Fund initiative and what it will mean for all of our children. For those of you that are just joining us, I'm just sending you a quick reminder that Spanish translation is available. And if you need that resource, please look for more information in the chat. Now I am going to turn over to Biz to get the presentation started.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Jill's going to put stuff up. Thanks, Jill. So for many years, District 65 parents and caregivers have been talking about this issue. Whenever we have conversations with people who have older kids in District 65 that have gone through our system, they say, oh yeah, we were talking about that 20 years ago, or we were talking about that 30 years ago. And so we wanted to bring folks together and talk about the inequities across the district. Jill, if you can go to the next slide, that would be great. And so in 2016, we brought reps from every school, and we got a PTA rep, teacher reps and a principal rep and reps from all the PTAs to come together and discuss what existed and what we might do about it. It's been a highly collaborative process and one I'm very grateful to have been a part of as we kind of wrestled with some of these questions together. So as we spent years analyzing and studying what was going on, in 2018, we developed an intervention to try to redistribute some of the resources to move more towards equality, not even yet towards equity. And in doing that, it was an improvement, but it felt like it wasn't all the way that we wanted to go. What I will say is that the years of conversations really created the foundation for what we were able to do when the COVID crisis hit. Our PTAs came together, and through our coordination and collaboration, we were able to raise over $500,000 and help over 700 families who were struggling. And as we set it up, we knew that our efforts would not be sustainable. We were not able to be functioning as a long-term nonprofit, but felt that we had the resources and the opportunity to make a significant difference, even if it could be temporary. And so we're very proud of those efforts of coming together and trying to provide as much resources for folks in need as we could. As we continue to have conversations, we realize that we haven't reached the equity goal that we have in mind. And that's where we started talking about One Fund and how we could come together to collectively problem solve and really address all of these things in terms of pooling resources for our district moving forward. So Kelly's going to give you a little bit more about the history and some of what we've learned along the way.
Thank you, Biz. Yes, next slide. Yes, I'm going into the history and background a little bit because we imagine there are at least some folks here who are relatively new to this initiative. And so I wanted to lay the background for the rest of the presentation. As Biz said, for many years, there has been a sense that PTA fundraising disparities have resulted in inconsistent and inequitable experiences for children across our schools, as well as a sense that this needn't be the case and a desire to explore changing it. So the chart on this slide offers a snapshot of the 2016-17 school year operating budgets this is for the elementary and magnet schools. For some of you who've seen other presentations or been to other meetings, the numbers may look different from what you recall. And I'll just say that these numbers don't include fundraising dollars for capital projects. These are the operating budgets. So that may be where the difference lies. But nonetheless, you can see that there's a dollar to student range from $50 to $143, which is almost threefold. And it doesn't take much to imagine how that might affect the experience, not only of a child at one of these schools, but the faculty and staff, just the experience of being in that school versus one that has different resources. And then I just make a note here that a couple of schools in our district have specialized populations with higher needs and limited to no fundraising capacity. So those schools didn't have the opportunity to provide the experiences that PTAs often undertake. Next slide, please. So where does PEP come into this? as you're hearing tonight, the goal of PEP is to ensure that students in the district have more equitable access to the important enrichments that PTAs provide. These, of course, are things like field trips and school assemblies, those community building events most schools do, Fall Fest, ice cream social, after school programming, and the list goes on, regardless of the school they attend. So the work is led by the PTA Equity Committee, which, as Biz said, has been a highly collaborative group with a lot of stakeholders involved, reps from every district, PTA, a principal, a teacher rep, PTA council representative, Foundation 65. And I'll say for at least the past few years since I've been involved, there have been subcommittees and school years, summer committees and school year subcommittees that, that undertook to drill down on certain elements of the work or explore topics that needed further study before being brought to the larger group. And then I just wanted to say that, I'm sorry, the last point is that we've been meeting monthly to share data, to understand current practices and needs, identify the inequities, and propose interventions. And on a more personal note, I would just want to say that it would be really, really difficult to summarize the discussions that we've had over these many months and years. But we had representatives at nearly every meeting, we had representatives from each of these groups. And I'm willing to bet that some of you may be sitting with some hard questions this evening. And I'd guess that a lot of those questions were brought to these meetings. They were tossed around, they were talked through, and they were addressed. So what you're seeing tonight is the end result of that lengthy collaborative effort we've had during these past few years. Next slide, please. Here we have a timeline. Biz went over some of this, so I won't spend much time here, but the group began in late 2016. The monthly meetings started in 2017 and continued into 2018 when the first PEP intervention was undertaken, with the result being that higher resource schools shared with lower resource schools, and the few schools that were not asked to share or receive funds nonetheless signed on to the project and donated to PEP to indicate agreement with the direction PEP was taking. Actually, we had a similar intervention the next year, but as we all know, COVID intervened this year in 2020, and it interrupted PEP's progress toward a One Fund initiative. So PEP pivoted from its original goal to help meet what amounted to a district emergency. And we were grateful to be able to help raise $500,000 and help hundreds and hundreds of families during that most acute phase of the crisis this past spring and summer. Moving forward, I'm sorry, I wasn't moving the slide. I just wanted to say that heading into this school year, PEP created district-wide enrichment options for students across the district that we all get to enjoy remotely for now, and has helped ensure that PTAs had the ability to start back up this fall, which leads us to the present, and I will turn it over to Carla. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kelly. As Kelly just mentioned, in 2018 and 19, we started to redistribute funds from some of our higher resource schools to our lower resource schools on a voluntary basis. We felt that we needed to start somewhere as we nuanced and circulated ideas for longer term equitable plans. As a result of these efforts, we can see from the chart that some of the schools on the lower end did come up from where they were in on the second page, I think, of the slides and the graph we showed there. But lower resource schools are still receiving much lower amounts per student. I think we're looking now at roughly $71 per student versus $131 per student. But in addition, we needed to start to acknowledge that they were also the schools with the highest actual need. And that temporary working solution also didn't include JEH, which is one of our lower elementary school, pre-K schools. It's critical for me to also mention that as we got this first step in motion, we explored so many other long-term models. We considered the sister school model, where we would pair one high resource school with a lower resource school, and they would sort of help, they would help support the other. And we looked at a direct funding campaign where each school would do their regular funding, but we would have a separate fund that we jointly raised to help some of the lower resource schools. But that, folks, is simply not equity. That is charity. And at the core of any equitable solution, we must have a true commitment to collective responsibility. And that is the goal of PEP. Move on to the next slide, please. While I know we've seen a million iterations of this image and the most liberation-minded version blew up the entire analogy altogether, I will still use this slide as a brief reminder that equality is about giving everyone equal input, while equity, which is our goal, is about giving everyone what they need to achieve equal outcomes. And that is the focus of our PEP committee. Next slide. So in this hypothetical model, I will use it, this is a hypothetical model, and I'll use it to illustrate some of the points I was trying to make on the previous slides. So if we look at two schools, school A and B, school A has 16% lower income, 16% lower income population, and school B has a 67% lower income population. Using just two examples of items that PTAs support today, funding field trips and providing after-school enrichment scholarships, we see that if both these schools had, say, 460 students, their relative need for scholarships and field trips, after-school enrichment scholarships and field trips would be vastly different. School A would need to sponsor 55 kids for field trips and 30 kids for enrichment classes, versus School B at 231 students sponsored for field trips and 122 for enrichment scholarships. So this could not make it any clearer that considering the level of need at each school must be a fundamental part of our equity model. And those two examples were only part of the inequity story that exists today in District 65. We see inequities across many other areas in our district. For instance, even if we stick to enrichments, some schools have 30 plus options and have very limited use of all the scholarships that they offer, while others have as low as 9 options, and then they have to turn away students who are seeking scholarships. We have some schools with discretionary funds of up to $10,000 in teacher and principal grants, and others have 0. And one of the aha moments for me, as a parent who sits in one of the mid-tier schools, I didn't even know yearbooks were a thing in elementary school. I learned in our initial cross-school analysis that not only do some schools have yearbooks, but they're not even funded by the PTA because they're able to send out, because of the resources in that community, they're able to send out a form and parents fill it out saying, yes, not only will I buy a book, I will buy one for another family who can't afford. And the PTA often ends up with excess funds after that ask that they can use for other things. Other schools have never printed a yearbook. Some schools also spend thousands to ensure that kids get free school t-shirts, which helps build school spirit, while others make it available for those who can afford to purchase, while others have never even attempted this feat. So I hope that this helps illustrate that we can't speak about equity without looking and adjusting for the actual need of every school, every individual school, and creating our model around that.
Thank you, Carla, for giving all that background, and thank you once again to Kelly and Biz. So we're moving on to, so what exactly is PEP's proposal to address these inequities in student experiences across the District 65's schools that have been provided by our PTAs? As Kelly, Biz, and Carla have all mentioned, we're talking, the PEP's proposal is the One Fund initiative, which intends to pool all District 65 PTA funding sources. So all the funds that are raised will go into one fund, and this fund is held at the Evanston Community Foundation. And so thus the Evanston Community Foundation serves as our fiscal agent. So as our fiscal agent, what ECF does is they collect and they hold onto it, and thus distribute the funds. So this fund actually acts as like a flow in of funds and then a flow back out of funds. So these distributions that are made at the direction of the PEP fund manager, who is a member of the PEP fund committee. So we believe that this model will also create like greater opportunities to raise more funds by working together as a collaborative one district versus subscaling fundraising by individual schools. So as this diagram shows, while we currently and will continue to rely on fundraising by individual school PTAs, We will also pursue district-wide PTA fundraising opportunities. And then we will also have access to funding sources that most individual PTAs do not have access to, including things like corporate donations and foundations and grants, and then even donations from individual community members. And when Biz mentioned at the beginning, we had great success in leveraging these new funding sources while raising money for our COVID emergency relief. We actually, in that process, we were able to, for example, secure a $50,000 grant from Evanston Community Foundation. We were able to secure $35,000 in matching donations from the Evanston Baseball Softball Association, EBSA. And we also secured $20,000 from AYSO. And in addition to all those three sources, among other family fund donations, we also raised an additional $60,000 just from individual members of our community within the District 65 community, but also in the greater Evanston community, which I think is like a huge opportunity as well, because like Biz mentioned, there have been so many Evanston, and I've had older people have come up to me since I've been a member of this community for so long that have said, we've been trying to do this forever, and are inspired and excited that this is actually happening. And so we will actually be able to draw on those resources as well to get even more funding sources. So how would the distribution, so now we know where all the money is coming in from, or where, so then the next question is how, and the main question is how would distributions to the PTAs under the One Fund initiative work? So the funding framework, it considers two forms of distribution. So there's an equality distribution and an equity distribution. So the first piece is this equality distribution. And this means that each school is going to get an equal distribution on a revenue per student basis. So this distribution is going to occur first, and it ensures that each school receives sufficient funding for baseline activities. So the equality distribution ensures the minimum revenue per student raised by PTA in 2018-19, which is what we based all of our models and all of the data on, is the 2018-19 year, which was $50 at the elementary level and $15 at the middle school level. And also in the equality distribution, Park, JEH, and Rice all will receive a flat $5,000. So once that equality distribution is achieved, the remaining funds are allocated in an equity distribution. And this equity distribution will be allocated to schools based on the size of their school, as well as the ratio of their students receiving free and reduced lunch at that particular school versus that of the entire district. And the reason why we chose the free and reduced lunch population as the basis of our equity calculation is because it's a consistent measurement. It's consistently measured and reported metric by our district. It is directly based on household income, and it is readily available to PEP as well as the District 65 PTA community, as well as our broader community, as it's in the beginning of schools report on the district's website. And this metric we can use without there's no other invasion in family privacy or additional burdens of data collection. So based on, just as a reference, based on the combined fundraising of PTAs in 2018-19, it was about $590,000. So in this model, the amount left over for the equity distribution was approximately $270,000. Which amounts to about 45% of the total amount fundraised to be allocated equitably. And when we were going through all these models, we felt like that 45% number was a good number to aim for each year, regardless of the funds that are raised. So the goal is to always have about 45% of the total fundraising dollars in any given year to be allocated equitably. Because otherwise, because our whole model is about equity. This means if funds raised dip below what we raised in 2018-19, the equality distribution will have to be adjusted accordingly using the 55% remaining dollars raised. Also, one other thing to note, JEH and Rice do not receive an equity distribution due to their unique student population. Thank you. So this is the meat. This slide shows what the funding model looks like. This is based once again on the 2018-19 school year. These are the funds raised amongst all PTAs, which was about $590,000. And there is an assumption in this model that this level of fundraising will remain the same or even increase when we combine our efforts as a district, as district PTAs, and thus have access to other funding sources, like I mentioned, like grants, corporate donations, and then the broader District 65 and Evanston communities. This funding model ensures greater equity in District 65 PTA funding by, as you could see, allocating higher resources to our schools with the highest need. We looked at this on a per student basis so that we could eliminate the size of school as a variable in how we fund. While we use PTA spend on a dollar per student basis as our framework, this does not mean that the PTA needs to spend that amount on each student. It is simply a way to ensure that we can look at funding across schools on an apples to apples basis. When you look at this graph, the lower resource schools are on the left-hand side, while the higher resource schools are on the right-hand side, with the first bar representing the first PEP intervention and the second representing the One Fund Initiative intervention. The One Fund Initiative intervention better addresses what the needs are at each school, because while the first intervention did make progress, the disparity in per student dollars, as people have mentioned before, fundraise still remained significant. You will also notice a red line on this graph that denotes the $50, which is the size of the equality distribution that I mentioned in the framework slide. A quick reminder on this $50 is that back in that 2016-17 slide, this was the amount that was also the lowest revenue per student from a PTA prior to any sort of PEP intervention. And while we recognize that there were PTAs that functioned on this amount, we also recognize that while functioning, they were unable to truly meet the full needs of their students as it relates to providing enrichments and community building. So all the above amounts above the line represent the equity distribution. So just as a quick kind of thing, if you take the PTAs so let's say you take the two PTAs at either end of this chart. Then let's say the one on the far left, so it flows from the lower resource schools to the higher resource schools in this chart. So if you take the one on the far left, and let's say that's got a 50% free and reduced lunch population, while the one on the far right has 20%. The differences between each school, what each school is receiving in that equity portion is directly reflects the fact that that first school has a 2.5 times greater free and reduced lunch population than the second school. And then thus that is how it's addressing that significant need that we have all talked about. And then just a quick reminder, that this chart represents elementary schools and magnet schools, and the middle schools will be participating, although the distributions will be different. And the other quick thing, we did consider 4 other potential options for the equity allocation or for the equality allocation, but the $50 per student option was chosen by the majority of District 65 PTA equities as the preferred funding model. One final thing to note about this slide, from the beginning, we prioritize and will continue to prioritize the high needs population that Park School and Rice School serve. We will allocate a flat $5,000 that in the equality distribution to Park PTA, they will also receive an equity distribution. While Rice School and JEH do not have PTAs and have other avenues of funding and support available to them, this funding does not cover things that PTAs would typically provide, for example, teacher appreciation activities. Therefore, Rice and JEH will both receive a flat $5,000, but will not be receiving an equity distribution. How will Oh, sorry. This next slide is just talks about briefly about reserves and PTA funded capital projects. We are still working on these two categories. Reserves, we're currently working on whether or not and addressing whether or not schools should carry reserves and what should that be. And then quickly the capital projects piece, just to address that, because of COVID, there's no capital projects that are taking place in 2020, 2021. So just look for updates in 2021 for more on capital projects.
I think it's probably worth clarifying that whenever we're saying we mean the entire PTA equity committee. Our decision-making process is to always be in collaboration where there are reps from every school as part of that process. And so often when we're saying when we were working on this and we're looking at this, every school will have an opportunity to weigh in on those decisions through that process. So let's talk a little bit about the timing and process for One Fund. So one of the challenges is that we are trying to create as much structure and clarity as possible so that people feel comfortable committing to participating in One Fund, but recognize that some of the decisions that we need to make together can't be made until we decide if we're doing this, right? And so we need to wait until the vote happens for some of these decisions. So the plan for this fall is for schools to fundraise as normal through their PTA groups. I mean, obviously, because this year is a pandemic, that's going to look different than it always does. But for PEP, the January to June period is going to be a really critical time. We'll still be doing individual school fundraising for folks to contribute into the One Fund, but we also will be doing, more community-based, like collective, centralized fundraising. And just to clarify, it's not that individual PTAs can't get corporate sponsors or can't get grants, but as we know, the attractiveness in any of that process is usually based on numbers. And so for us collectively coming as several thousand folks, rather than us coming as a couple hundred here and there, we do think it's going to be more attractive to donors. And we did see that in our COVID process. So there are several outstanding questions that we'll be talking about between January and June and working with PEP to just decide. One is, how will we define total fundraising, right? How, and kind of what are all the definitions of fundraising? What counts as a pass through? What counts as, what does it all look like? Another question we'll need to talk about is, when do PTAs need to know their distribution amounts, and when do they need to start planning and budgeting? When do PTAs need to have monies distributed in order for them to cover start of year processes? Our goal is to not create any burdensome processes for our PTAs. We are going to work with folks to say, what is the right timing for cash flow in and out? What are the right structures for the transactions that need to occur so that people can do their PTA business without additional challenge, but just that we're working towards creating this more equitable fund so that everybody can work with that. When we think about some of those decisions, we're going to create as many, some guidance and structure in how we do that. But we really, at the core of our philosophy for PEP is believing in PTAs and trusting PTAs to make the best decisions for their school and having school autonomy. And so we do not want to create something that has tons of arbitrary rules or create PEP as any kind of policing agency in terms of what schools are doing. But I think that we can all recognize that there might be times where schools can figure out workarounds to whatever systems we create. And I think we always want us to be thinking about that. The philosophy is for us to collectively problem solve, have collective responsibility. And whenever we are excited about an opportunity to maybe put our school at a greater advantage, we are probably moving further and further away from the purpose of PEP. And so while it may not break a rule that we've created, that should be our guiding principle always, is this in the spirit of what we're trying to do together? Or am I trying to hoard resources or, or maneuver in a way that will hurt the overall success of PEP? So, as we chart out some of those decisions, that's going to be central in our decision making is how to make it as easy and as possible for PTAs to function and create structure that works together, keeping that philosophy of this overall mission. So what the summer will look like is we will, PEP will communicate the disbursement amounts and people can start to plan what that looks like. Again, that exact timing will be dependent on conversations we have with PTAs about what makes sense for that, those timelines. And then the 21-22 school year will look like this. We'll have schools doing all of their individual fundraising and trying to, and make no mistake, we want people to fundraise as much as possible. We want you to fundraise to your capacity. But also we would, have centralized fundraising options to try to capitalize on the fact that we have this collective effort. It's a different thing for 18 of us to go to one restaurant individually than when we came together and did restaurant week. It's a different thing for us to go to, corporations or other entities and say, we're this group representing this whole town, and we want to serve our kids together, rather than each of us fighting for resources or trying to make those connections and relationships on our own. So in summer of 2022, schools will contribute their fundraising into the fund, and again, PEP will communicate the distribution amounts, and then in 2022-23, we'll kind of follow that similar process of schools doing their fundraising and using the monies that they've been given, and then fundraising for the next school year. So it's always, we're always intending to fill the pot so that the following year we can use those resources. All right, Jill, if you can go to the next slide, please. So, one of the questions that has come up is how will we measure success of the fund? And I think this is going to be an ongoing discussion. I don't think there's any final place that we will arrive, because I think, like any good system, we should always be evaluating what's working and what's not, and making progress. But I do want to recognize that what we're trying to do here is a paradigm shift. And the shift we're doing is about collective responsibility, not charity, as Carla mentioned. In a charity model, people often lose agency, and power dynamics can create a burden on folks without resources to justify their decision-making, as though folks with more resources are owed explanations, or that they're making good decisions without being evaluated. And so we've been really cautious about creating the charity dynamics in what we're doing. We really want to have that collective responsibility as our central theme in how we decide things. And so we want to develop best practices and collaborations that maximize impact without causing harm. There's many indicators that we think can show us the progress to equity and things that we can utilize. One of those is that schools will be able to offer things that they were not able to previously offer, and we'll be able to see in their documentation and their budgets, like all sorts of new things that are being provided. Another kind of long-term indicator, I think, will be increased fundraising, right? When we see the value of committing to equitable experiences for all District 65 kids, we will see individual donors seeing that value and committing to giving more of their personal dollars. We'll see institutions and organizations and corporations seeing the value of this collective effort. And so we do anticipate that, that the support of our collective mission we'll be able to mark that by seeing increased dollars. The pandemic makes that timing uncertain. It may take us a few years to see that, but we do think that that's an indicator that will show us that we're on the right track. I think another key piece of this is stories and testimonials that provide a qualitative data on how these funds are changing experiences. I think that's this has been a really interesting part of what we've been doing for years, is how do we marry our anecdotal qualitative understanding of what's happening with our hard numbers financial formulas. And I think I think all of us would thank our financial mastermind Elizabeth for helping us figure out the numeric part, but we know that the anecdotal piece is also really important. And so we're going to gather those kind of testimonials and stories from all schools, right? We want to hear how it's impacting schools that previously had higher resources. We want to hear how it's impacting schools that previously had lower resources, to be able to get a collective picture of what's happening. The challenge with metrics, as we were talking about a little bit, is is to be careful about that charity model. That we recognize that schools right now are not using metrics to evaluate their success of equitably serving students, and maybe that's something we want to look towards collectively addressing. But that if we aren't asking every school to use metrics now, we don't think it's appropriate to require that as part of the PEP conversation. But we do think, and we do recognize that each school is trusted to make the best decisions for their school community. And we really want that to continue. We do not anticipate or have any desire for PEP to be an organization that micromanages or interferes in the good work that people are doing all the time on behalf of their schools. You know your school communities best, and we don't want to be a part of, creating a burdensome process for you to try to capture your decision-making process when we trust you. One of the things I think we can do in this space is play a role in providing resources and building schools' capacity. We don't want schools to lose their autonomy in making decisions, but we don't want people to feel like they have to justify their decision-making process, but all of us can benefit from us really thoughtfully considering how we serve the most vulnerable populations among our schools and how we create equity within our schools. And so I think there's likely going to be some, subcommittee or a task force, or I don't know exactly what it will look like, but that will be in our January to June discussions of how do we make sure that this is doing what we really want it to do, that it's serving folks across the entire district, without us creating something that is both loses agency and burdensome for PTAs. So Elizabeth is going to give us a little more information about the structure of PEP in the future.
Thanks, Biz. So how will we ensure that PEP endures? Obviously, at least I'm not planning on being a parent in District 65 forever. So it is of utmost importance to all of us that PEP continues on. So the first thing we looked at is the basic, is on like the basic level as far as where this committee should be held. And one of our members consulted with the Illinois PTA, Liz Shakin, and it was concluded that the PEP committee should become a standing committee of the PTA Council, and that is being worked on currently. As mentioned from the beginning, PEP and PTA Council have worked closely together on this initiative because we both strive to decrease the inequities that exist within and amongst our individual PTAs, and then amongst all of our District 65 PTAs. Thus, this seemed like the most logical step. And then, like I mentioned in my the first slide, as far as the structure of how it all works together, the Evanston Community Foundation is the fiscal agent, and which will hold the funds and receive the funds, and then distribute the funds per the the direction of the PEP fund manager. So the second piece we looked at was the governance within the PEP committee, and we believe it makes the most sense for the governance to mirror that of what a typical PTA, District 65 PTA would be structured and governed. This would include 2 co-chairs, a treasurer who would also operate as the PEP fund manager, a secretary, a fundraising chair, and marketing P&R and /PR chair. Also mirroring typical PTA organizations, officers would be elected by the PEP committee. The intent of these leaders would be to serve 2 terms. And in the case of the co-chairs, those terms would be staggered to ensure continuity. And I'm going to turn it back over to Biz to wrap it up.
So looking at our next steps for moving forward, PEP is going to continue offering conversations like these wherever we need to. We're happy to come to your individual PTAs and work through questions or concerns that we haven't been able to address yet. In November, the PTA execs through their PEP reps will vote on the recommendations for reserves that were provided by a reserve committee of folks from different schools. And then in December, we would hope that every school would have a membership vote prior to December 3rd to determine whether they're going to participate in one fund. And then of course, once that decision has been made and we know who is participating and who isn't, then we can focus on that January to June and figuring out the remaining questions and logistics that we still have to sort out. And then 2021 would look like, continuing to work with PEP to develop and circulate best practices for equitable PTA spending. We would monitor the progress on the fund and discuss any necessary changes, collect and share impact stories about what is working and what isn't, and kind of what people were able to do with the resources, identify possible interventions about capital fundraising. All of those things are in the near future. If you can go to the next slide, Jill. Our goal with PEP has always been to solve problems of inequity together. We know that one of the greatest obstacles to doing so was that we often aren't aware of how things in other schools operate. I think all of us would say one of the biggest ahas from this process is We just thought every school worked like our school, right? And so for some of us, you know, my kids are at schools with less resources. I thought everybody just did the things that we did. And then I had no idea that people were having all these additional experiences. And I think for folks who have those resources at their school, they assumed everybody was getting a chance to do the things that their kids were. And so that's been a really illuminating part of the process. And we've spent years, you know, learning about the scope of the challenges and collaboratively problem solving. We have honestly answered hundreds, if not thousands of questions together at this point. We've analyzed, we've debated, we've been wowed by each other's creative solutions. And so, you know, we want you to have the benefit of having as much information as possible. As someone alluded to earlier, it's really difficult for us to capture every discussion we've had in 4 years because so much happens in the room together, right? The room where it happens for the Hamilton fans. And so, you know, but we encourage you to seek out information so that you feel like you can confidently support this initiative. So we've developed a website that has FAQs. It has, you know, all sorts of information there. We have these other resources where you can hear from other members of the community that are not involved with PEP or that are involved with PEP saying, here's why I support PEP, right? Here's why I think we should be doing this. So we encourage you to check out all these resources. We encourage you to reach out to your PTA leadership to contact your school's PEP rep if you still have questions. We encourage that if those are questions that can't be answered within your school, for you to reach out to us. Our hope is a unanimous vote in December. We want every school to confidently be a part of this process. And we have really, you know, made it a very intentional effort to include everyone's thoughts and concerns all along the way so that it could be something we create together that everybody can support. So we hope to see you doing that, and here are the resources that give you some more information if you need it. Molly, it's up to you.
Thank you so much, Biz, Kelly, Carla, and Elizabeth. Our presentation portion of the town hall is complete, and now we're going to move to the Q&A portion of the town hall. Over the last 45 minutes, attendees have been able to submit questions. And so now we are going to be introducing a panel to help us answer all of your wonderful questions. Suni, Jill, Lish, and Liz, please introduce yourselves and tell us why you became involved with PEP. We will start with you, Suni.
Hi, everybody. My name is Suni Kartha. I have children at ETHS and at Orrington Elementary School. And I also serve on the District 65 School Board, have been on the board for the past 7 years. I am really thrilled to be a part of PEP and of this group for a lot of the reasons that people already stated. So I won't necessarily restate them, but I will say that a big part of my just core beliefs is that we all of our students benefit when all of our students have an equitable experience. And so I think as a part of that, I think all of us in the community have a responsibility and an opportunity to make sure that every child in the district gets an equitable experience. And to me, PEP is one way. PEP and the One Fund Initiative are one concrete way that we as a community can come together and make sure that all of our kids benefit from this. So thank you all for being here, and I'm looking forward to getting to the questions.
Hi, my name is Jill Kidd, and I have been on the PEP committee for 3 years now. I have children at Kingsley and at Haven, and I am the Kingsley PEP rep. The reason I became involved in PEP is, I think a little bit, I was naive. When Biz talked about like you get to know what happens in your own school, I thought the PTA enrichments and the activities and the things that the PTA sponsored things that my children had access to at Kingsley were things that all children across the district got. And I was really surprised to find out that that was not the case. And I felt that, you know, a child's experience in their school shouldn't be determined by how much their PTA can fundraise. And I just felt there's a much better way to think about how we support all of our D65 students and really move from this idea of like my child, my school to our children, our schools, our district. And so that's why I'm involved. And I forgot, my pronouns are she, her, hers.
I'm sorry, I forgot that also. My pronouns are she, her, hers as well.
I think I'm up.
Yes.
So hi, my name is Alicia Aiken, Lish Aiken, and I am the Shoot PEP rep. I have a child at Shoot and I have one in college who went all the way through Oakton, Shoot, ETHS. And I got interested in PEP. I was the president of the Oakton PTA, and I saw just kind of like the daily struggle of trying to figure out how to get the terror of convincing teachers that they could ask for support for classroom projects and then worrying about whether we could fund the projects that they asked for, and the uphill battle to schedule enrichments, and then find enough kids who were interested and could afford to participate, and then try to find money for other kids. And for every one scholarship spot, having 5, 6, 7 kids who were asking if they could use it. And simultaneously having a kid at the high school where it was one high school and one group and one town, and seeing how resentments that these kids developed, honestly, in elementary school and in middle school were being carried over to the high school, about that kid from that part of town versus this kid from this part of town. And the PEP was just the most concrete, thoughtful, honest conversation I had ever seen about how we might start thinking as one district, sending, one group of kids to one high school to have one excellent experience. And what can we do? What do we have power over to make that happen? And I think Liz is next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Liz Rolowitz, pronouns she, her, hers. I represent Oakton Elementary, and I'm also part of the leadership team for PEP. The reason why I joined the PEP committee is because I had heard murmuring around the town that there was a lot of differences between the different elementary schools, and so I wanted to join and learn more about it. And it quickly became clear that we were all operating from very different places. One day we did an activity where we put up the giant Post-it notes and we all wrote down every single thing that our PTA offers to our students. And some schools just had these long, long lists, and some schools had these short lists. And coming from one of the lower resource schools with less ability to fundraise, I could clearly see that our kids at my school were just not getting the same experience as other schools. And I really left that meeting just feeling sick to my stomach. I mean, I just felt sick about it. I couldn't believe how unfair it was. And I was really upset that this was happening in Evanston, the self-proclaimed most liberal city, and that we were failing our kids in this way. And I had to be a part of the process. So I'm thrilled to still be here since 2017.
Great, thank you, Liz. Jen, do you want to take it away with starting to answer some of these questions live? You're on mute.
Thanks, Molly. My name is Jen Zier. I'm the Lincolnwood PEP rep. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I'm going to start with asking Lish a question. Lish, one of the questions that I'm asked a lot, and one that came up in the chat tonight, was why move forward with one fund now? It's a pandemic. Parents are feeling really stretched. And why not take some more time to build buy-in across the district for this program?
Yeah, I think it's a really important question, Jen, and I'm glad that someone asked it. I think we want to start from, we are making a paradigm shift, and it is a big shift, and it is going to feel like a big shift no matter when we do it. So I think that there will never be the time when everything is calm. In some ways, it's not dissimilar to when people start thinking about having a family, right? And there's never a perfect time. So why is this the right time? There's a couple reasons from my perspective, from the group's perspective. One is that this is actually a time when PTA leaders are not engaged in the typical activities of planning events and being in the school building. There's a lot, I mean, there is a lot of work involved. I was exhausted at the end of a year being a PTA president. A lot of those activities we would normally be doing, we're not able to do right now. So in a weird way, it is creating capacity to think about these questions in a way that we don't normally have. Another reason is that we're actually coming off a major success when 3 of them actually, where we came together as one district and saw what we could do. We raised approximately $500,000 for COVID relief as one district in the spring. We coordinated enrichment opportunities for this fall as one district. And we coordinated ensuring that all PTAs had the funds that they would need and the support they would need to start the school year. So we're literally on a roll of successes. It makes perfect sense to keep talking about what we can do together. There's a way in which the world has shaken the Etch-a-Sketch, so we might as well redraw it the way we want it to look now. But for me, the most important reason why we're doing it now is because we had we have had multiple collaborative conversations about this. We had a PTA council meeting. We had representatives from all the executive teams. We had representatives from the PEP. And we had a long discussion, and we took a vote, and 2/3 of the people wanted to move forward either this September 2020, or January 2021. So the collaborative sense of the group is that it should go forward in January.
Thanks, Lish. Molly, your question?
Perfect. So we're getting some questions around the capital improvement projects and what schools, what types of grants and fundraising opportunities for capital projects. Lots of questions. I'm trying to read them live, so I apologize if I'm skipping around a little bit. But Suni, would you be able to go through a little bit of what the process will be in the future for the capital project and fundraising around those?
Sure. Yeah, you know, when we started our analysis of budgets and where the inequities lie, it was very quickly apparent that a strong source of inequity in what PTAs can do was around capital projects. We had some PTAs that were able to fundraise and support playground additions or improvements, library expansions, things like that. Whereas other PTAs, it just wasn't even a part of their discussions to do those things because there would never have been the capacity to fundraise the amount of money that would be needed to do those kinds of improvements. I think one stark example that came to mind around playground equipment was there was a period of time where the district was removing some unsafe equipment at all of the schools. And what we discovered is that some of the schools, the PTAs were able to jump in and say, okay, well, we'll replace it with this and still kind of have a full playground for the kids, and other PTAs just, that wasn't even a consideration. So we knew that that was something that we had to deal with. We also knew that it was going to be something extremely complicated to deal with because frankly, the district does have to be fairly involved in that conversation because the district is always involved in any capital project conversation. So, you know, I'll be honest that when we did the pilot intervention, we kind of punted the question. We were fortunate over the summer to have the expertise on a pro bono basis from a consulting group that was able to work with us, not just on some of the different one fund model options, but also on some options for capital projects. And we've shared that with PTA, with the PEP committee and also with PTA executive teams. But we've also decided that for now, because this year being a COVID year with, you know, the district can't focus on any capital projects. That isn't something that's going to be happening in this school year. So it's something that we decided we have those options. We can revisit them in, January through June and make a decision before the end of this school year on how we'll move forward on capital projects.
And then just a little clarification, a question has come in a few times. If you could just add a little bit onto that. What if a school wants to raise money for a specific project individually?
So I guess I'm making assumption that we're talking about capital projects. And so I think, again, for this year, I think we're all under the assumption when we talked to the PEP committee and talked to PTAs, there weren't any capital projects, special fundraising projects that were anticipated for this year. So we'll have a collective answer to that before next year so that we know how PTAs can and should approach that.
Thank you. Jen?
Thanks. This next question is for Jill. Jill, can you talk about what happens if PEP ends up raising less funds than the $590,000 that PTA, yep, we're real people with live animals. Okay, so the model assumes the $590,000 that was raised in the 2018-19 school year. Can you talk about what happens to the model if we raise less money than that? Specifically, is there a percentage that's left for equity? And if you can talk about what that means in real dollars to our PTAs.
Yeah, happy to. If we raise less than the $590,000, obviously the numbers you saw in the presentation in terms of funding for each of the schools will be lower. The philosophy that we used in thinking through this scenario was we felt it was very important to retain some amount for an equity distribution. So as an example, let's say we only raise half of what we did in 2018 and 2019, we wouldn't even have enough for a full equality distribution to give every school that $50 per student for elementary schools and $15 per student for middle schools. So what we said is we're going to reserve however much we raise. If it's less than that $590,000, we're going to reserve 45% of that for an equity distribution. So 45% of that 590, or whatever we raise, 45% of whatever we raise would be distributed according to the equity distribution formula. And then the rest would be distributed equally on a per student basis amongst the rest of the schools. We looked at a few different scenarios, funding scenarios, on what the numbers would look like. I think it's a lot to go into on this call. We can certainly share those numbers with your PTAs. And in fact, we've shared them with PTA execs. But the philosophy is if we raise less than the 590, we're reserving 45% of whatever we raise to be distributed using that equity formula that depends on the free and reduced lunch population. And then the rest would be distributed on an equal dollars per student basis across the schools.
Thanks, Jill.
Lish, I have a question for you. The PTA's tax exempt status is one of its most important assets. If that status is revoked, charges of negligence or mismanagement may be brought against the officers and directors. Therefore, when considering a proposed activity, the PTA should ask, will this activity adversely affect our tax exempt status? Did PEP have a conversation about managing this risk?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that question. And while I answer it, I'm going to say that thing we're always required to say, which is I am a lawyer and I sound like a lawyer, but I'm not PEP's lawyer. But what we have done is we have looked at the bylaws. And again, I was a PTA president, and when I wasn't president, I was on the audit committee for the Oakton PTA. So I've thought about these questions a lot. We consulted with the Illinois PTA regional rep, and talk to her about it. And frankly, making sure that there are no questions about tax exempt issues or appropriateness of this, or the reason why we're in conversations to become for PEP to be a standing committee of the PTA Council, because the PTA Council is a subunit of the Illinois PTA, and every PTA in District 65 is a subunit of the Illinois PTA. So we're all subunits of the same overriding 501c3 organization. That's actually the way that PTAs in Illinois hold tax exempt status, is not individually, it is through the Illinois PTA. And the Illinois PTA bylaws are what we're looking at in setting all of this up. Essentially what this is a community fundraising together and then distributing the funds by an agreed upon formula within the community. And that is actually, when we talk to the Illinois PTA rep, we learned that that actually happens in several communities around the state of Illinois, that they do fundraise as one community. And that the PTA Council is really their centralized place to assist them with that fundraising.
Thanks, Lish. So this next question is also for Suni. Suni, there was a question that came up about a potential conflict of interest with board members also being in PEP leadership. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the relationship between PEP and the board, and also talk about the governing structure moving forward when we move to one fund.
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned, I've been on the board for 7 years. So when Biz and I started this, I was a sitting board member. But we've made it really clear from the outset that, this was not really a board initiative. It really was more of a grassroots parent initiative and conversation that we were trying to start. And so I think, some of I'm sorry, I have a child, he's trying to come in here. So I'm trying to, hold on one second. Okay, sorry about that. So going forward, Biz and I are currently serving on the board. We don't view this as, none of this is board directed or board mandated. This is really all PTAs joining together, having a collaborative discussion and voluntarily deciding whether or not to participate. Going forward, as Biz and I do not intend to stay in leadership roles forever. And so we have had discussions at our PEP committee meetings about how we will structure the future sustainability of PEP, and Elizabeth spoke to that a little bit during the presentation, that we have, similar to what PTAs do, we'll have different officer roles that we'll have a nominating committee for, that will recruit from within the PEP committee. I mean, we think it's important that the leadership roles are taken from people who have had some experience working within the committee. And that gets elected every 2 years, and just similarly to, I think we've talked about having our PEP reps also serve 2 years, or having served for some time before joining a leadership role. And so we want to create a sustainable situation where people are regularly coming into the committee. We can have nominating committees just like PTAs do to recruit leadership and keep things going that way.
Can I just weigh in real quickly on the so there are numerous representatives on PEP that come from different sectors of our community and of our district. And frankly, everybody brings more than one experience, skill, background, and identity to the room. So it has been an asset to have someone who's on the board in the room who is able to sort of explain some board, rules or processes that we didn't necessarily already know. And it would have been very difficult to move forward without that. And I think there's certainly never been a sense that that's helpful, just like it's helpful to have somebody who is from a higher resource school, or somebody from a lower resource school, or someone who's a social worker, or somebody who's a financial accountant. Everybody's
Lish,
is helpful.
Lish, sorry, I'm just gonna, cut you off. There's no other way to put it, so we can get to some more questions. Molly?
This question is for Liz Rolowitz. There's a few questions coming into the Q&A, so I'm going to try and merge them and ask them what I feel is the best, how they've asked in the best way. There's questions about the COVID dollars that were raised, and also the impact of COVID and how that will impact our ability to fundraise in the future. Do you want to answer, how this is going to impact potential fundraising and what we've thought about moving forward with this?
I think, as was stated before, we realize that this is going to potentially be like a lower fundraising year because some people will not have the same ability to donate to their schools. But at the same time, we also saw that those that do have the ability to donate were very, very generous when we reached out to the community over the summer for the COVID Relief Fund. So we're pretty confident that we can still reach into those types of potential donors, and as well as we can start using our bargaining power of operating all together as a district. We can start using that strength in numbers to reach out to corporations and corporate grants and other kinds of larger funds. And so that's kind of how we hope that will balance out whatever lower fundraising may occur at the individual school level.
So one of the specific questions says, with lack of fundraising dollars due to COVID-19, what is the ask for each school to contribute for next year? So do you want to
cut out? Could you repeat that?
One of the specific questions is about the with lack of fundraising due to COVID-19, what is the ask for each school to contribute next year? Do you want to address how that's going to happen?
So we'll continue to ask our schools to fundraise to their greatest ability. We're all going to just keep doing what we've always done. We'll put on as many fundraisers as we normally do, and then and that's it. I mean, we don't have a set number. We can't tell people what they have to raise. We can't even expect a certain number from a given school. So we're just going to all do the best we can and work with it from there.
Great, thank you.
And if I can just add, I mean, it is in the best interests of all of our students to fundraise as much as we can. The more that each school fundraises, the more that goes into the pot and the more that comes back to each and every school. So I know there's been a couple questions around, do we expect fundraising to go down? I mean, maybe yes, but again, I think this is a collective effort. We're believing in the collective effort. We're believing in helping all of our students, and we're believing in the untapped potential of corporations, foundations, grants, community members that I think was proven during the COVID relief efforts, that there's a real demand for wanting to support a more equitable PTA funding model.
This next question we'll go back to Liz. Liz, can you talk a little bit about the lack of, well, there's no other way to say this except that we are predominantly a bunch of white women making decisions for what's best for Black and brown kids. I'm thinking of Robin DiAngelo and white progressives being the worst kind of, or the ones that do the most damage. So there's some questions in the chat asking how people from Black and brown communities have been part of this discussion. And what can we do to make sure that more people, particularly people that have free, you know, that are parents or caregivers to kids qualifying for free and reduced lunch, how can we make sure more representation, or that they're part of this conversation and that they're the ones making the decisions?
Yeah, that's a great question. And in fact, it's often, you know, the elephant in the room. We're very aware of that. We're very aware, and we're disappointed in how lack of representational our leadership has been. I think that, you know, historically PTAs in general have been mostly white and female, and that became reflected within our committee when we started, which was mostly white women that joined. And we do know that we want more input, and we do want more representation at our leadership level. However, when we have offered to our committee to take on more leadership roles, we only had a couple volunteers, and they happen to be white. We continuously reach out to our committee, which has actually become much more diverse, which we're thrilled about. We've had a lot of great representation coming from all the schools, and we do continually offer to our committee to take on committee roles and other leadership roles. And I think going forward in the near future, we're hoping that many of those members will do that, and we'll see a much bigger change in our leadership as for PEP leadership.
I also would like to just mention that PEP is not controlling how money is spent, just the redistribution of funds from lower resource schools, from higher resource schools to lower resource schools. So the power for schools to make decisions and for those Black and brown bodies and minds to have input into how the money is spent doesn't lie with this group. And I want to make sure that we not necessarily push that question back at that group, but this is about a redistribution of funds, not about how it's spent. And the how it's spent is really where it actually impacts the folks in our community.
Thank you, Carla. And thank you, Liz. This question is actually for Elizabeth Davies, who has been extremely instrumental in setting up the financial modeling for the distribution model. There's a question that has come in that I think we could just answer. Who acts as the account manager of the money once it is with ECF, and what are the fees that they charge?
So so I'm currently the fund manager. So I'm the treasurer fund manager of PEP. And I work directly with Jan Fisher, who's the CFO of Evanston Community Foundation. We are looking at, obviously this is a huge push with money. So ECF while it does its own audit, we are looking at, an individual financial review of these funds as well, which I know is a concern amongst every person. My background is in auditing, so I totally understand that and understand that that's an important factor in all of this. And then as far as the PEP fund, that position, like I mentioned before with the structure, that PEP fund manager will be part of that structure, is also the treasurer of the PEP committee, and will be decided in the PEP committee, and it will be a role that lasts every 2 years. As far as the fee goes, the fee for the Evanston Community Foundation is 1/12 of 1% per month. And that's based on the average daily balance in the fund. So that balance, because because we're operating this as a flow in and a flow out, that balance will change over the year. And so that percentage in that amount will change over the year, but we don't see it as being a huge, significant amount of money.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Jen, do you have another question?
Yes. So there's been a couple of questions about the impact of PEP on Foundation 65's fundraising efforts. Jill, can you take that question, please?
Sure, I'll do my best. Yeah, I mean, again, I think there's lots of great causes in this town for us all to get involved in. I don't view it as being that much different. I mean, prior to One Fund, people were donating to Foundation 65 and also to their school PTAs, right? I believe that people will still continue to fund to Foundation 65 if that's what they were giving, and also to their school PTAs if that's how they were giving before. There may be, I mean, I think we have worked very closely with Foundation 65 over the years. And in fact, they were, you know, we have a Foundation 65 member who sat on our committee. I think they're great partners with us. And so I don't, you know, while it may be a possibility, I think we've been really collaborative and worked together and are supporting one another. And I don't see this as a big issue. I think individuals in the community will still give how they give, and where there may be overlaps with corporations or foundations or bigger donors, I think we'll work in the same collaborative way with Foundation 65 as we have worked in the past.
Excellent. Thanks, Jill.
This question, I'm going to put two together, and I'm going to ask Suni these questions. The first question is, and I can separate them if you can't remember the second one. Will there be any visibility into how the funds are distributed between the schools? And the second question is, if a school contributes less than the suggested amount, so can you explain how that's going to happen? Will the school receive a distribution at all? I think they're trying to say if they don't fundraise what the numbers I don't know what that question means, but I assume it means if they don't fundraise enough of the money to contribute to the pot.
So I'll answer that second part first. So I think it was Liz who mentioned this. We're not asking for any target fundraising number. While we are basing our formula on what we collectively fundraised in 2018-19, and we chose that year because pre-COVID, that was a pretty typical fundraising year for our district. And so while that's the number we're using, we are not, and we did discuss this, like, should we have target fundraising numbers for each PTA, but we quickly dismissed that as not really, we just need PTAs to fundraise to their capacity like they currently are. And then PEP can take some of a role in doing some of the centralized fundraising. So because there's no target, there's no penalty if a target isn't met. So
that's how I'm reading the question. So if the member who wrote that question could re-ask it, if it wasn't answered or asked the correct way, that would be great.
And then now, can you repeat the first
the
question?
Second question is, yeah, will there be any visibility into how the funds are distributed between the schools? Do you want to communicate?
Yeah, absolutely. So as a committee, any decisions about money flow out of the PEP fund is taken by vote of the PEP committee, and with each PEP rep representing their individual PTA. So the expectation is that the PEP representatives are in regular communication with their exec teams. And then when we have a vote that we need to take on it, that they will have consulted with their PEP PTA exec team on that. We make our whenever there has been a distribution, we've made that public. We distribute that to the PTA, our PEP reps, and to the PTA exec team. So I anticipate that is what we will continue to do in the future. So yeah, certainly we are not trying to hide any of our financials or any of the decisions that we're making. And those decisions are definitely made on a collective basis.
Jen, do you have another question?
So someone in the chat asked about whether or not they can vote to join PEP. So I think it might be good to go over how people who are supportive can show up at their PTA meetings to vote. So how about Liz answer this question? Or Lish.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Okay. So we are having our, oh, sorry. Oh, okay. So we have our representatives, our PEP committee representatives going back and educating their PTAs at their schools about and keeping everybody abreast of all the work we're doing. And they will be within the next 2 months making sure that their schools are fully informed on our process and what the One Fund initiative will look like and what the impacts will be. And we will be voting in December. Each school will place one vote saying yes or no whether they will participate in the new One Fund.
Thank you. Molly, do you have another question?
I'm trying to, there's a question about, does the PEP tour and survey each school for capital project improvement in order to ensure equity, specifically restroom renovation? I know we answered that about the capital projects at the beginning of the Q&A, but maybe we could review that again because we're still getting questions regarding that.
Yeah, so PEP, oh, I'm sorry, I'm just gonna jump in and answer this one.
Perfect, thank you.
But yeah, PEP is not, so specific building related improvements like restroom renovations or roofing repairs or kind of routine maintenance are the responsibility of the district. When we talk about capital improvements that PTAs and that, you know, as a part of the PEP fund, that is really sort of the extras that PTAs generally that can have the ability to that they fundraise and provide. So things like playground equipment, or in some cases it has been library renovations in the past. You know, maybe landscaping, things like that for the exterior of the building. It is not things like restroom renovations or building additions or roofing masonry repairs. The district does have a process for routinely surveying all of the buildings, and we have, you know, a facilities list that we get every year that we approve. That as a board approves, but and the district does look at that with an equitable lens, but that's not what we are envisioning for PEP.
Thank you, Suni. I just wanted to be mindful of the time. It is now 8:27. We still have several questions that we were not able to answer. If possible, if you would like to stay on a little bit longer, we could try to see if we could answer some more questions. But we also want to give everybody an opportunity to get off the call if they would like to. So this next question, hopefully.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. Suni,
Oh.
As you were speaking, a question came in. Please remind me, is PEP planning on including capital improvement fundraising in One Fund contributions? So I'm sorry that we have to clarify.
So the unfortunate is that I don't have an answer for that yet. We have some different options that does include just kind of folding that into regular kind of One Fund distributions. But there are some other options that we are looking at. I don't really want to get into them too much right now. Like I said, the PEP committee has looked at them. PTA exec teams have seen them. We will definitely delve into them more and make them more widely available as we, as a committee, and kind of think through it more. But right now, the decision is exclusive of capital projects, which again, we think for this year, since there aren't going to be any of these PTA initiated capital projects happening, that it isn't going to cause any significant hardships for any PTAs. That by the time next year that any of that kind of fundraising would happen, we'll have an answer of what will happen to that or how we'll approach that.
Thanks, Suni.
Thank you.
This next question is for Lish. Lish, does PTA Council have bylaws that include PEP and that are approved by the Illinois PTA? So I think we're just trying to figure out whether or not this model is okay according to the laws of, or the rules of the Illinois PTA. And I know you met with them, so I'm hoping you can answer that question for us.
Yeah, so addressing the first part of the question, yes, the PTA Council has bylaws. Yes, those bylaws are in accordance with the rules of the Illinois PTA, and yes, those bylaws allow for the PTA council to establish a standing committee, just like actually the standard bylaws for every PTA also include the ability to create standing committees. So it's provided for in the PTA council bylaws. I think that answers it, right? I don't want to go on too long. I didn't miss anything, right?
You did great. Thanks.
I was succinct for once.
So I just want to reiterate while we're wrapping up due to time, every District 65 school has a PTA Equity PEP rep. I would encourage you all to get in touch with your PTA executives who then can introduce you to those PEP reps. And each school now that we've presented the town hall will be moving forward with having special presentations. If you need more information about PEP, we encourage you to go to the websites and look at the FAQs. But we really encourage everybody to, with further questions or with any additional information that's needed, there's on the website, there's an email you can email us, or really reach out to your individual PTA PEP rep, and they will be able to help answer the rest and any unanswered questions that have come as a result of this town hall. We thank everybody for being a part of this evening's discussion, and we hope you all will join us and your individual PTAs in voting yes for PEP on December 3rd. Mm-hmm. Thank you all very, very much, and have a great night.
For attending.
Thank you for coming.